Hey guys, this is Nick from Type 1 Training Systems here today to talk to you a little bit about Afrezza. So a little background about me is I've been using Afrezza for 4 years now, all throughout my college career. So I'm a senior in college now. I've had Type 1 for 17 years, so since I was just about 4 years old. And I used a regular traditional insulin pump for most of my life from age, I think, 6 until 18. And then I decided I didn't want to have something strapped on my hip all the time, didn't want to have the tubing. So I decided to ask my doctor about switching to Afrezza, which is an inhaled insulin. And I've been using it now for 4 years. So I'm actually switching back to a more traditional insulin pump. So I just wanted to talk about what is Afrezza. I've been around a lot of nurses and doctors who have never even heard of it, and then talk about why I decided to switch back to regular insulin pumping. So first off, what is it? Afrezza is, like I said, inhaled insulin. So rather than your traditional injected insulin, it comes in these little blister packs, and it's a dry powder that you inhale, and it's really fast acting. So it kind of hits right in your lungs rather than taking the time to be subcutaneously injected through your skin. The way it's inhaled is through one of these little inhalers here. So basically, it may seem a little weird and different, but the dosing for Afrezza is, it comes in 4 units, 8 units, and then they also make a 12-unit cartridge. So each one of these little pods, I guess you could call them, is either 4 units, 8 units, or 12 units. And you pop it in here, and then 10-15 minutes before my meal, I just inhale like this. And then that's it. So rather than injecting insulin shots or doing an insulin pump, that's how I've been taking insulin for the past 4 years. I also do take one long-acting shot of insulin, so I take that every morning right when I wake up. I use Tresiba as my long-acting insulin, and that's worked pretty well. But yeah, so a lot of people just aren't really aware that Afrezza even exists. A lot of people think it's kind of like a new thing. It's like kind of taboo to be using, but it's totally FDA approved. Back before Afrezza was approved, I'm not sure if it was the same company, it's made by Pfizer, Pfizer, made a different kind of inhaled insulin that was similar, but it came in like a big inhalable, kind of like what you would see for like a bigger asthma inhaler, or maybe something for like COPD, a big inhaler that really wasn't feasible for people to be carrying around with them. So then they eventually got it to where all you needed to carry was these, so it's a little bit easier now. So how is it different than normal insulin? When I say normal insulin, I mean like rapid-acting insulin that you would get in, an insulin pump or regular insulin pens. Like I said, it's really fast-acting, so it peaks in my system probably in like 15 or 20 minutes, and then it's out of my system within like 30 or 40, whereas regular insulin sometimes doesn't even peak until that 30 or 40 minute time frame, and then takes 2 hours to level off and come out of your system. So this is really great because of the fact that I'm really active. So multiple times a day I'll be out, riding my bike or exercising in some way, where it's not always good for me to have all that active insulin in my system at a certain time. So this has been really great because it's just kind of like in and then out. So I avoid all those potential lows. But I'll talk more about lows later because that's part of why I ended up switching. Are there any side effects for Afrezza? Not for me. For some people that take it, they'll have sort of asthma-like symptoms, like they'll get kind of like a cough and a tickle in their throat. And for some people that I know that have tried Afrezza, it just doesn't even work for them at all. Like they'll inhale it and it doesn't do anything, which I thought was kind of weird because it was so potent in my system. But I guess everybody's different. But if you are going to go on Afrezza, you do need to do a pulmonary function test. So that is just kind of like your baseline before you go on this, to make sure that after using it for a year, 2 years, that it's not doing any damage to your lungs. And luckily, I've gotten one every year so far that I've used it, and I haven't had any issues. When you switched from pumping, what was the learning curve like? So there was definitely a bit of a learning curve with Afrezza. So like I said, I was on a pump for most of my life, so switching to something that wasn't a pump was obviously weird in the first place. So even if I were to switch to just regular injections, but this was even weirder just because it's such a rapid acting insulin, that something that I wasn't used to. It took a long time to really dial things in. So the first hard part was dialing in my long-acting insulin, which, like I said, I used Tresiba, so it took probably like a month of just trial and error, changing around my dose to figure out what really worked for me. And then once I kind of figured out that long-acting dose, my like set point of where my blood sugars were going to be kind of steady around, then I could figure out the dosing with Afrezza, which, like I said, because it only comes in 4s, 8s, and 12s, it's kind of more about timing than the dosage. So if I eat a smaller meal, then I'll take a 4 unit, and if I eat a bigger meal, then I'll take an 8 unit. But it's not always that easy. Like, if, depending on what my blood sugar is before the meal, I'll take it 5 minutes before a meal, or I'll take it 10 minutes after a meal. It kind of all depends, and it depends from person to person as well. So the way I do it might be totally different than someone else does it. What are your favorite things about Afrezza? So my favorite thing is probably how fast it brings down a high blood sugar. So if I'm, hanging out around 200 for some reason, I ate something that was a really high fat meal that kind of like came back in later and is spiking my blood sugar. If I take an 8 unit, it'll pretty much consistently always come down within 20-25 minutes, which is crazy compared to regular traditional like Novolog or Humalog that could take hours for it to level back out. So that's really great. But that's also a downside because it drops so fast that if I were to take like a little too much or take it too early, it can drop me really fast, and I can go low really fast too. So there's been times where I've taken it and I've gone really low really fast. Like, I've dropped down from like 150 to 40 within like 10 or 15 minutes. And at that point, it's dropping so fast that I couldn't even really feel it. So once it got that low, it all kind of hit me at once, and it kind of had like a scary low, Luckily, I'm like really in touch with how I'm feeling, but for some people who aren't as aware of their low and high blood sugars, it can be a bit scary. Okay, so next question, what does Afrezza taste like? So I've gotten this one a lot. It doesn't really taste like anything. I say that sometimes there will be occasions where I'll kind of like, it'll go down the wrong pipe and I'll taste it a little more than I normally would, and it just kind of has like a sweet sort of taste. But really, most of the time, it doesn't taste like anything. Who do you recommend Afrezza for? So this is a tough one. It's hard to say because I am switching off of it, but I would definitely recommend it for adults who are already pretty well controlled with their type 1. Afrezza is technically not approved for under 18 yet. I think they're doing clinical trials with it, but definitely someone who's a little more well controlled, because it takes a lot of discipline and timing and like dialing in of your long-acting and short-acting insulin to make sure that this works correctly. And it can be pretty dangerous, like I said earlier, because my blood sugar drops so low sometimes that I really, really have to be on top of it. So if I'm not, then, I could have a dangerous low or go unconscious or something. So yeah, I would definitely say this wouldn't be something I would recommend for someone whose sugars are not very well controlled, and then they think this is what's gonna get them to be controlled. I think it'd be probably better for someone who should sort of figure themselves out with either an insulin pump or injections, and then they could transition to this as their maintenance insulin. And then I also said athletes. I would recommend it for some athletes because, like I said, you're not running around all the time with all that active insulin, so it's sort of in and out of your system. But that brings me to why I decided to switch off of it is while it's great that the Afrezza itself is so fast acting and it's in and out of my system so quick, the fact that I have to take a long acting insulin every morning means that I kind of have that same set point of what my blood sugar is at. So I always try to have my long acting insulin to where my blood sugar is right around like 100. That's like kind of my baseline, somewhere between 100 and 110. So the problem with that is if I have a day where I'm more active, or something's different in my body, whether it's like a sickness or something, like if I'm sick, my blood sugar will be higher than that set point. If I'm really active one day, then my blood sugar will constantly be lower than that set point. So the fact that I've gotten my blood sugars to a point where I'm always around that number, that kind of means I'm always verging on going low. So the fact that I'm so active means that because I'm always almost low, whenever I go to do some kind of activity, I always have to be eating something. So I'll take like little sips of maple syrup or honey or fruit. I'm pretty much like eating something all day where I don't really want to be. And then on top of that, even if I still am eating all day, I still will end up going low a lot with this because I'm at that set point all the time. I'm more active, so I'm constantly kind of bouncing between low and normal. It's been great with this because I really haven't, like, my time in range is really great, but like I said, I'm kind of bouncing between low and that normal point. I don't really go high a whole lot, which is great, but it can be just as dangerous to go low. You can also have complications from being low a lot, so I'm thinking about switching back to a traditional insulin pump, maybe an Omnipod, just because it's, there's no tubing, and I'll be able to set temp basal rates. So rather than taking my shot in the morning and that sets exactly where my blood sugar is, using a temp basal rate means that you can change where that set point is depending on what time of the day, how active I am. So if I'm going out for a bike ride or something, I could set that temp basal to be a little bit lower, so I'm getting less insulin during that ride, which is something that you can't do when you're taking shots. Let's see, what other questions? Do you recommend Afrezza for busy people? Yes, so just like what I said about the athletes, less active insulin working on you means that it's a little easier to control those blood sugar spikes, and it's a little bit more predictable. And then the last question, has its effect changed over time? Not necessarily for me. My fitness level and my body composition and insulin sensitivity has changed a lot over time. So I guess you could say yes, its effect has changed over time, but I think it's more because of my body itself rather than the insulin. I think it's still affecting me the same way, but I think my body's just taking it in differently. So it definitely has more effect on me now than it did when I was starting college, but like I said, I'm much more insulin sensitive now than I was then. So I think that's the big effect. And then, as a little demo, I have some juice that my sister just made. So I figured, what better time, this is probably like 30 or 40 carbs, to do a little Afrezza demo for you. So if you want a closer look, that's what the 4-pack looks like, because this is like a smaller meal, so I'm going to take 4 units. So I pop that out, and then I just set it right in here, and then close it. And then you just wait a couple seconds afterwards to make sure it all soaked in, and it's as easy as that. So if you guys have any more questions, feel free to reach out, put something in the comments, send me a personal message, and thanks for listening.